Hello, I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of Hyperion Cleantech Group and your host for the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. Thanks for joining us. And thanks very much for the feedback we've had on our last few episodes. It's been great to hear that. If you haven't already, please do subscribe on the YouTube channel or on your podcast platform of choice. This week, we've got a great guest. We're going to be talking Deeptech. What's Deeptech all about? Talking about investing in that sector and looking at innovation, actually, as well. Innovation for both corporates and within the startup sector. As I speak to my guest, someone I've known for quite some time, actually, Rubina Singh, who's currently principal at Octopus Ventures. Got a great conversation to have. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Hey, Rubina, it's great to have you on the Leaders in Cleantech podcast.
Hi, David. It's good to be here.
At last. So lots to talk about. Perhaps you could start with a little bit of a flavor, because you've got quite a varied and interesting background within energy and clean tech, and we're going to dive into some of that. But perhaps you could share a little bit of just a flavor of what you've been up to prior to joining Octopus Ventures.
Sure. Perhaps I could start at the beginning. So basically, my background is in sustainable energy and electronics engineering. And I started my career as a solar engineer working on developing and commercializing a novel new bifacial solar cell invented at Australian National University, which is when I fell in love with the concept. And following that, I joined Fraunhofer Center for Sustainable Energy in Boston, initially again as a solar engineer, responsible for new technology development and testing for clean tech, particularly solar and storage, working quite closely with startups and corporates. And what we saw at that point was some really incredible technologies, but then saw them also succumb to the value of death, which then made me move on to the commercialization and investment side of things to understand why that's happening and what's going on. And I ended up leading Fraunhofer TechBridge, which is basically a group for technology validation and acceleration of early stage deep clean tech, working closely with corporate VCs as well as VCs to help startups become more investor ready, often then followed by seed investments in those startups. So 5 years ago, I moved to the UK, where I established the electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles division at a London-based consultancy before moving to Centrica, where I spent 4 years before joining Octopus Ventures.
Right.
And over those 4 years, I basically rose to head of ideation delivery group, under which I set up and managed a group focused on driving net zero innovation within the business and then taking those new solutions to the market. Now I'm at the pre-seed Deeptech fund manager at Octopus Ventures, focusing on early stage deep tech, enabling a sustainable planet. And alongside that, I also sit on a board of Powerful Women, which is a professional initiative to create a gender-balanced, diverse and inclusive UK energy sector.
Yeah.
So basically, I think my career to date has been about the three loves of my professional life, if I may. So these are sustainable technologies, innovation, and striving for equality in the industry.
Great. Resonate all with us, especially as people will be no doubt bored on the podcast. Listen, but solar is my first love and my first introduction to clean tech. So I had many early experiences with, when I say early, like 2007, 2008. So solar has come a long way since then. It's been great to see a lot of bifacial projects in the UK recently. And obviously, we're still looking at innovations to get solar even more efficient, which is something we share from the beginning. But let's get more up to date. So wanted to talk to you about innovation, because there's a lot of experience you have there around innovation. But first, let's touch base with Deeptech, because there's a lot of, I guess, misunderstanding around what exactly constitutes Deeptech. So maybe a good idea to get your definition of what that is and the types of businesses and the types of technologies that you are working with and seeking out in your role at Octopus.
Sure, that sounds good. So in terms of how we define Deeptech, it's basically startups working on technologies coming from significant scientific and technological advancements. Often these are backed by years of research, quite IP heavy, but also at the same time then difficult to replicate, which gives them that advantage. So we broadly classify Deeptech across 6 areas that we're looking at. So this is definitely not exhaustive, but these are advanced materials, robotics and drones, AI, quantum solutions, biotech, and electronics and photonics. And what we're seeing is quite a bit of innovation across these, but also often in combination of these, especially focused on driving sustainable technologies. And that is one core to our thesis, that focus on technologies that will enable a sustainable planet. So everything from novel battery chemistries to new modular reactors for green ammonia, AI tools enabling accelerated discovery of nanomaterials, high performance microprocessor technologies. So we look across the landscape. We also realize that the UK and Europe in general is a powerhouse of incredible innovation coming out of universities. So we are looking at supporting those innovations as well, often at the very early stages. So we invest at pre-seed, seed stage in Deeptech, and that's where my core focus is.
Okay. It's interesting you touched on before about this valley of death, because with Deeptech, and we work with people like IP Group and a number of their portfolio companies at Hyperion, and there's a lot of, as you say, years and a lot of academic research going into getting the business to a point of spinning out, but there's still quite a long way often to get to commercialization. And that's difficult, where a traditional VC probably doesn't yet see the opportunity, or is unsure in terms of placing a bet just yet. And I guess there's also still quite a bit of a cash runway before there's commercialization. So I guess would that be fair, that Deeptech tends to be investing earlier in things with perhaps a bigger risk, but also clearly potentially a bigger benefit?
So absolutely, that's exactly what Deeptech does. And also, today we're in the midst of multiple crises. We're tackling climate change. We want to achieve the transition to net zero. We want to make energy secure, and we need to combat pollution. We need to overcome food, water, and resource constraints. We are tackling so many different challenges. And what we've seen so far is there's been a lot of investment in software, but software alone will not help us get there. We need that investment in hardware and software, in those integrated platforms that are directly addressing these challenges. So with Deeptech, it is high risk. It is also high rewards. There's potential to generate outsized returns, while also disrupting markets and bringing those solutions that can truly just change the way we live in a very positive way. As you mentioned, David, so we have seen increase in Deeptech investments over the past year. So for example, globally, the investment grew from 15 billion in 2016 to more than 60 billion. And here in the UK itself, we've seen an increase in Deeptech investments by 33% over the past decade.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you just scratch at the surface, there's so much more to do. And funding is one key aspect of enabling that. But we also need to bring together an ecosystem that helps us support Deeptech and ensure that we're scaling it correctly.
Yeah. I think that's so important, because we see there's a counterbalance to one extent. We already have in existence, solar as an example, great technologies which can take us a long way towards decarbonisation, and we need to scale and move those businesses along. And it's great that typically VCs support in that environment, but equally we need those game-changing technologies. And it's good to see that there are now, I say, more and more funds, and from what you've just said, much more investment in these earlier stages, higher risk things which can really move the dial if we get this right. Things like fusion technology, for example, things that are really going to make a dynamic change. I know you're relatively new into the role at Octopus, but what types of technologies or what types of companies have you seen or been involved with in the sort of period that you've been there so far?
So basically, again, looking at technologies across the range, what we want to do is support novel, potentially game-changing early-stage deep technologies. I've been involved in a range of technologies, some that I can talk about, some that I cannot.
Sure.
But we've been seeing innovation come across in terms, for example, high performance, highly secure microprocessors that can improve the way microchips, sensors, devices work, but while also at the same time potentially contributing towards energy consumption reduction and thereby reducing carbon emissions. Similarly, we're also looking at very new novel technologies in terms of modular new reactor for treating green ammonia, which could also at the same time, which is in a way helping potentially disrupting the Haber-Bosch process, which a century ago disrupted the world and helps bring it to where it is today, but at the same time also potentially help address some of the challenges we're seeing across storage and transportation of hydrogen. So it's quite a breadth of different technologies. It's very exciting what we're seeing as well. And what we are doing is, in addition to backing early stage deep tech, we're also supporting them directly in terms of tackling one of the key challenges, which we think is customer discovery, where we can help enable companies to find market fit at the pre-seed stage. So we're using our network of over 200 Octopus's portfolio companies to connect founders with end customers to help provide that feedback on requirements, proof of concepts, and basically help them become more investor ready. The current landscape. Yeah.
Super exciting. And one other thing I wanted to touch, because you've got a strong background in innovation and been very in a variety of both academic and commercial innovative environments. And one of the things that's, I guess, you have the core academic environment where sometimes things get spun out, sometimes they don't, but you've got a lot of extreme intelligence and extreme innovation coming from the academic community. You obviously have many startups that bring that to the table. Sometimes it's been quite a challenge for corporates to innovate, because the structure of corporates tends to be more bureaucratic, tends to be more slow. And you've had experience, obviously, in all sides of that equation. So are we at a stage now where there's a better coordination from corporate startups and academia to really drive forward some of these technologies?
Absolutely. So I think things have come along. There is more coordination, but at the same time, I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. So in my opinion, there are 5 key players that really need to work together to enable that ecosystem we need around Deeptech, around Cleantech, from accelerating it from lab to market. So these are academia, the investor community, entrepreneurs and startups, regulators and the government, and corporates. And we need funding and resources to help startups de-risk the technology iteratively, actually, as they develop it, because some of these are quite technology heavy and you need that iterative de-risking. Research institutions and often corporates also can provide those facilities needed to validate technologies at multiple stages of development. Alongside, you also need the right regulatory environment and government support to enable the creation of new markets in the right way, while striking that balance so as to not be too prescriptive but inhibit innovation. We also need a pool of talent that's bringing together technical and commercial skills, some skills and technologies that we haven't seen before. And the VCs and other investors can come in with the funding, but also the broader support from the network of portfolio companies that experience their and customers, which is what we're looking to do. So basically, I think we need all 5 key players to come together and break down the silos. And like you said, David, it is increasing. There have been initiatives, but I don't think we're quite yet there where we have that truly, the true cross-sector collaboration we need for accelerating this development, from scaling and deployment of deep tech to create a sustainable planet where all 5 players are coming together, working in a well-functioning integrated system. But there have been a few announcements recently. So I'm quite excited about ARIA, so the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, which is similar to the ARPA model in the US, which is very successful, focusing on funding high-risk, high-reward scientific research at that stage before it becomes de-risked. And then recently, we saw the announcement for Cleantech for UK, which is a coalition of investors, venture builders, and research institutions coming together to accelerate Cleantech scale-ups. That's exactly the kind of stuff we need. I think we really need to bring these different peers together. And in terms of corporate, so it's been interesting, like you said, it's been quite a great journey to have seen innovation from a research institution point of view, a startup government point of view, and the corporate point of view, and now investor point of view. But from a corporate point of view, there are quite a few different ways in which corporates can innovate and are innovating. So there's obviously the in-house R&D, the innovation labs, the corporate venturing arms, and there's more broader open innovation, which basically refers to looking more broadly, not just looking at inside the companies within for innovation, but more broadly looking at partnerships, joint venture developments. And I think this can really help corporates accelerate technology development without having to dedicate the money, time, and resources which are often needed to set up the in-house divisions. But another advantage to corporates here is to really understand what is coming. So we get the wider view of latest research and innovation across an area of technology. So the breadth as well as the depth, and which can be insightful in guiding strategy in a cost-effective and efficient way, and also then enabling the testing and adoption of new technologies which might be strategically relevant to them. In similar context, support from corporates is incredibly helpful to startups because they basically play that role of the potential end customer. They can help de-risk the startups, really help them understand the market and how the technology resonates, and actually addressing a solution within the market. So one of my key learnings early on in my career as an engineer, super excited by technology, was that a great technology doesn't always translate to a great product. If your customer doesn't understand what it's doing, if they're not solving a real valuable need that they're happy to pay for. And I think that's where corporates working with startups can be so incredibly useful in terms of that initial de-risking and getting that product market fit.
I guess that's definitely a challenge, because clearly I've worked and known many organizations who've come from academia or spun out from universities, and as we said before, it's been massively intelligent and clever people bringing together some amazing technology. But as you say, if there isn't a fit for it or a use for it, I guess that's relatively early that both either a CVC or a corporate or working with an organization that's focused on deep tech can understand or help them to understand, is there actually going to be a fit for this? Or is it just a great technology that doesn't really have a purpose beyond itself?
Absolutely. And I think with Deeptech, because especially when you're focusing on the early stages, there are technologies that are looking to address trade markets that haven't been there. And there might be applications we haven't quite even discovered yet.
Right.
So I think sometimes that interaction with the corporates could also help on that journey where a technology has an application in one market, but could also have a very important application in other markets that just might not have been thought of at that point.
Yeah. Because something you said there, I was quite excited as well. The announcement of the Cleantech for UK. I was in Brussels recently for one of the Cleantech for Europe events, and I've been involved in that organisation for a while, and they've been on the podcast, and it's been great to see just what has been achieved in a relatively short period of time by making those connections between the investment community and the startups and the founders, some corporates, but also the policymakers, because it's really tough for policymakers, really, because technology moves so fast. And they've got so many challenges. And I think historically, it's, as someone who's worked in the industry a long time, I've always sort of berated to some extent those who define policies for being too slow and too inactive and things not moving fast enough. But as you get more involved on both sides of the equation, you just realize how difficult it is for them. And so organizations like Cleantech for Europe and like Cleantech now for UK, I think is going to help. And it's great to see those sort of initiatives taking place. I wanted to jump back, Rubina, briefly to your experience with Centrica, for example. So I've seen over the years where either a CVC or a corporate has got involved in a startup to bring on technology, and it's worked brilliantly. And equally, I've seen it where it's been suffocated and the corporate's kind of acquired a technology or a company and not known what to do with it. And essentially, it kind of doesn't really go anywhere. How does a corporate assess an investment, and how do they assess whether that's a technology that really is a benefit for them? It must be really challenging because they've obviously got their incumbent business to make sure they continue with. They've got to keep an eye on the future, and some of that, the future is eating their own lunch, so to speak. Some of the technologies will effectively kill their own markets in some ways. So how does a big corporate, from your experience, make those assessments, make those judgments as to which technologies they're going to bring on board, and how are they going to actually work with the founders or the academics who brought that technology to bear?
Right, that's a really good question, and not exactly like you said, it's not always easy. But I think there are three aspects there. So one, I think, is for the corporates, when there is a new technology they're considering that could be potentially game changing in terms of evaluating them, is to look within the company itself and find the right people. So I think often what happens is that right now we're living in a world where it's constantly changing. There are new technologies, but also the customer needs are changing. Mm-hmm. There are people within the corporates who are customer facing, who are interacting with them every day. And what I've seen in past experience, sometimes we may not always get the right people in the room at the right time. And that is super important. We need to have those people who have seen the customer's perspective, seen them change over the years, that can bring very valuable insights alongside the commercial teams, the technical teams. So it's about having a diverse type of group, including the diverse different teams. So including the customer facing teams, the technical commercial teams, to really come together and understand how the technology plays, how it fits in more strategically with the corporate. So that's one point. The second is then looking at the external markets, understanding what's happening, what the customer needs are. And when I say really understanding what the customer needs are, going and speaking to your customers. And that this is something we did quite a bit in my previous role at Centrica in the ideation group, where the focus was on speaking with the customers from the early onset. You don't even need MVP, you just need that idea. You can start testing and bring your customers on the journey with you. They actually appreciate it. So that's the second aspect to understand. And then the third aspect, which can be quite complicated and challenging, is, and especially in the context today, is when some of the technologies are addressing a future market that isn't there. So how do you really assess that?
Yeah.
And that one's quite hard, but I think this is where corporates can work with startups, with the investor community, to really understand, with the academic community, to understand what's coming, what the potential impact could be in the future. And I think that's where bringing together that ecosystem can really help to an extent. Of course, I mean, there's no straight, easy answer, but to an extent help understand, evaluate whether a technology works or not. So I think these three elements together ideally are needed for corporates to then make the decision.
Yeah.
In terms of working with the innovators, I think again, a balanced approach is needed. Like while at the same time recognizing that these innovators bring new technologies, you need to let just ensure that some of that isn't being inhibited, that it needs to continue. So a bit of that independence needs to be maintained. But at the same time, I think there's about striking a balance in terms of involving the startups enough in the corporate strategy, enough with the existing teams to understand more from a market point of view, to help get them the access, the experience to scaling up, which the corporates, I think, bring enough invaluable insights in, but also at the same time giving them enough autonomy to continue innovating and ideating within the startups. I think striking that balance can be quite important.
Yeah, it is a challenge. And I think going back to the point we said before about this, creating ecosystems where those people are much more coordinated, because again, been around a while, you've seen in the past CVCs who may be looking at future market conditions will go to a McKinsey or a Bain or whoever. Nothing wrong with those companies, of course, they're brilliant at what they do, but they're not usually, or haven't been in the past, well connected to the startup and innovation environment. And therefore you get maybe incorrect signals, and there are obviously some historic cases. But now the CVCs are much more embedded into the sort of working with VCs, impact VCs, working with universities, working with systems like Eco Summit that I'm involved with in Berlin, where you get everybody in the room at the same time. There's that much better understanding of each mindset of an area of focus, I think.
Exactly. And I think it's also, it doesn't help. It's exciting, but it's also complicated, because now you also see industries at the same time converge and they're blurring lines. So for example, with the rise of electric vehicles, the energy and the transport sectors are coming together, who traditionally operated in a relatively silent way, as they should have. And then how do you bring those sectors together? There are different business models, there are different technologies which can benefit across both the sectors in terms of electric vehicles, energy management, home devices, all for coming together. And startups have a role to play there, but also the corporates, the sectors just coming together. So I completely agree with you. Sometimes it's easier said than done, but it's bringing the different players together into the same room.
Yeah. And I think organizations like Octopus, who have again done some great things as a group, obviously over the recent years, and had Greg on the podcast in the past, and people like AP Group I mentioned before, who really get and understand and make those connections and really support and help, whether it's a university spin out or whether it's a startup, to really analyze and see what they have and where they could go with it, and to really give them support beyond the money. Because in some markets, it's a little bit tougher now, but over the last couple of years, finding money's not been overly difficult, but it's about having the right money and the right support. I think that's fairly critical that any entrepreneur should consider, particularly if they have a technology which may take a little bit of a runway before they get to a point of commercialization.
Exactly, completely agree with that.
And how are you enjoying the role so far?
Oh, it's been great. I'm really enjoying it. So as I mentioned earlier, I've been loving working on this, and not just because it can add a lot of value and journeying towards a net zero future, which is something I'm passionate about, but having seen innovation research institutions from that Fraunhofer point of view, working with universities, and then again from a government point of view, from startups and corporate, and now from an investor role, I think in this role I'm able to bring all of it together to hopefully help build that deep tech ecosystem. So that's been really exciting.
Right. One thing I want to pick up on that you touched on before, and another thing that's close to my heart is, and again, we've touched on it, it's really great now to have the ecosystem growing in terms of both policy support, governments pulling in the right direction, the ecosystem of VCs and investors and startups and scale-ups. One thing that often gets missed from my point of view is the talent aspect. You touched on that, and I'm glad that you did. And of course, beyond that, then there's the diversity aspect, which I think is important to us both. So you started your career unconventionally, let's say, for women to go into a really technical engineering environment. We still need to do much work there, I'm sure. Tell us maybe a little bit about the work of powerful women and just generally how you feel, if we've made advances as a sector in being more diverse as an environment.
Absolutely. So in terms of advances, I'll start with your last question. So in terms of advances in the sector, so at Powerful Women, we annually release the annual stats in terms of representation at the senior leadership level. Mm-hmm. So as of 2022, 27% of board seats and 15% of all executive director roles in the energy sector are held by women. Relative to previous years, this is progress, and it's definitely progress in the right direction. But 75% of the top energy companies still have no women in executive director positions.
Right.
Sometimes it feels like this is 2023. That's absolutely shocking. And then if you look at the VC sector as well, 2% of VC funding went to female entrepreneurs in 2020.
Yeah.
So yes, we've made progress, but it's clearly not fast enough. There's a lot that needs to be done. There's much further we need to go. And there are a few challenges here. So at Powerful Women, last year we published off a first-of-kind study looking at women in middle management alongside Bain. Right. And the reason we did that was because there has been work done in terms of understanding representation in senior management, but middle management is where a large majority of the population is working, and that's where the pipeline comes from. So we wanted to understand the challenges and barriers that women face in that area. And we conducted surveys as well as one-to-one interviews with women to understand. And it was quite positive to see that women are really excited by the energy sector, about career working there. There's a sense of purpose, and especially about being motivated by mitigating climate change and contributing to net zero. It also needs to be recognized that companies in the sector are making it clear about the commitments in diversity and inclusion, and this is being recognized. But what the research revealed was that there's a delivery gap. Right. Now, what do I mean by that? So basically, what we saw was that these big corporates have policies in place, they have initiatives in place, but those commitments aren't quite being cascaded effectively to all levels within organizations. So even if the policies are in place, the data shows that they're not being used by women. So for example, one of the stats showed that 58% of the women we surveyed said the company had a formal sponsorship program, but only 12% were benefiting from it. And another thing that came up quite a bit in some of the interviews I conducted was about how women felt their careers were negatively impacted once they came back from maternity leave or career break. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the organizations have the policies in place to support them in terms of flexibility, in terms of part-time work. But what they felt was that if they did end up taking that, it was perceived a bit negatively. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it was more benevolent sexism in a way, because managers and colleagues wanted to ensure that, the women were being supported, but to them, it felt like it ended up inhibiting their career prospects. So critically, what we saw are these policies are there, but they're not quite being backed up by an inclusive and supportive culture, and they're not being delivered effectively. So that was one big thing that came out. And I think, as you said, David, it's super important for us to find and attract diverse talent today. With the net zero transition, I can't remember the exact numbers, but 30 million new jobs are going to be created by 2030. And we can't really address some of the challenges we need by just taking people out from the same traditional talent pool, right? Exactly. We need all hands on deck. We need everyone there. And if we are addressing climate change, it impacts everyone. If we are to address this, we need to understand different perspectives. Right. We need to be representative of the communities that we're serving and where we need to address. So it is important to attract the diverse talent to the sectors, but we also need to ensure that we are cultivating the diverse talent we already have, otherwise we risk losing it. That was some of the work, some of the results we saw coming out of the study last year.
Yeah, it's quite reflective, actually. I mean, I was quite proud of one of the team at Hyperion Executive Search this morning posted that last year we placed 42% of our placements were women, and they're primarily senior roles, which was fantastic. But I know from working with the team and with our clients, it's taken quite a long time, and going back to the point that to move from having an idea or an initiative and a policy to actually making that embedded in an organization, and it's been a journey with some organizations. And one of the things I want to touch on, it seems easier to an extent, although startups by no means are perfect in this regards, and VCs you already mentioned are fairly poor in that regard. But it seems that from our experience working with startups, they're much more able to quickly implement and recognize when you share with them that it's about not just having the policy, but how that's described, how it's implemented, how it actually follows through. And sometimes, and again, not always the case with the corporates, but it's kind of, they create policies, but there's a disconnect between them then actually following through in terms of how that is as a reality for people day to day.
Absolutely. And I think with startups, again, it's a more agile environment. It's easier to do that. One of the things that I saw in one of the pitch sessions I was in, which was really positive to see, was when they were pitching the company, they pitched the technology, they pitch the team, they pitch the diversity of the team and how important it is
Right.
and how important it is in growing it.
Yeah.
So that isn't something I see every day, but it's great to see that coming into the startups. And I think that's where the investor community can also come forward and really help there. So for example, at Octopus, we're really passionate about putting diversity at the heart of our teams and investments. So in terms of building a team with people from a wide range of backgrounds and experiences, but also backing founders who are basically historically not have been as represented.
Yeah.
So for example, we committed to investing in businesses that are more diverse in every way.
Yeah.
So for our first KPIs, we've said that for 30% of the businesses we meet should have at least one female founder by 2025 and 50% by 2027. So that's just a first step in investing in diversity in all its forms. But there is a lot more that we as a sector, we as several different sectors need to come together and do here.
Yeah. Like, I think that the diversity thing is so much more than gender. Of course, that's a significant part of it, and perhaps one of the easier to see. But it's much more than that. And I think one of the things that, again, we've worked with organisations who've done great at recognising. We had one, I won't mention who they are, but when we started working with them, they recognised not just were they a bunch of white guys, but they were a bunch of white guys who all went to Imperial College, and they were just, and super talented, great people. Nothing wrong with that at all. But they recognised that was a lack of diversity. And so it was not just about gender, not just about ethnicity, but social backgrounds as well, because that's what frustrates me. Perhaps you've got a thought on this. There's so much evidence that shows that diverse teams work better and achieve better results, particularly with women, but diverse teams anyway. So intellectually, it seems the obvious thing, but there's still this lag. There's still a gender pay gap that we need to address. There's still diversity amongst teams. There's still boards who don't have any representation outside of, white middle class guys invariably. Have you seen either things that, in your experience, that where that bias has happened, or how do we break through from this kind of? It has to be some unconscious bias because, like I say, logic dictates that. We know the answer, so to speak.
I think the first step is to recognize that it's not one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a couple of ways we can do it. So at organizational levels, I think it's really important for it to come from senior leadership and then trickle down. And that's what I've seen working in the past. Large corporates, when the senior leadership is passionate, when it's motivated, it really, you can see the culture of the organization transform in a few years.
Yeah.
And I think the other aspect is culture, which is easy to say, but so hard to actually change it. One of the other things that came forward in our study, which I found a little shocking, was the president of the Boys Club. Mm-hmm. So irrespective, it came across from very many different organizations that it still exists. And women still felt that they just weren't able to get access to it. So that's just one example. So I think there is that aspect about senior leadership and trickling downwards. The other aspect, I think, is about giving more power to managers to really understand and treat their teams on basically on an individual basis, realizing how people work and not being afraid to have those difficult conversations and to really help and empower and support with their teams in terms of creating those diversity, but also helping the progression. And I think another aspect, like you said, is around that unconscious bias, which while I know a lot of organizations are implementing training there, which I think is a great first step. It also, the execution, again, this is not quite easy, but also how do you really inculcate that? And I think that, again, really comes down to changing the culture of the organizations. I think another important aspect before you also understand what part of the culture to change is to start by gathering the data. I do think a data-led approach is always helpful, and that doesn't just include surveys, but really go speak to the diverse groups, the diverse teams, understand it from their point of view, create a culture where they're not afraid to really share the experiences of what works well, what really isn't working well, and use that information to then come up with a more tailored D&I strategy for organizations. And finally, I think what we need to realize and accept is that we're working on net zero, we're working D&I. These are not two separate things. Mm-hmm. They go hand in hand. We really need to work on them together. Like you said, the business case is there. We have more than enough studies showing about how much diversity can improve innovation, can improve financial performance. Yeah. But I also found it really interesting that the Rose Review highlighted recently that if women started and scaled new businesses at the same rate as men, we could add up to 250 billion annually. So that's 8% of the UK economy. And this is just the UK alone.
Right.
So there is like, what is stopping us? I think at one point it is just about the initiative and just about making sure that we make a step change and not just small, slow progress. We need step change here.
Yeah, I think organisations like Powerful Women and others, Wise, with amongst others, who are helping. Because I think most, from my experience at least, and perhaps it's just they come to us to work when they already have an idea. They want to be more diverse, but it's the how. So the two aspects you touched on, one of which is retaining and nurturing and growing talent diverse talent once it's in your organisation. Clearly, we've been successful at working with clients on the front end of how do you actually hire, where do you find people from diverse backgrounds, how do you make them feel welcomed into the interview process and the sort of the hiring process. And there's quite a lot of work that organizations can do on the front end of making sure they're having diverse shortlists and they're bringing diversity into their organizations. But then, as you say, it's really important that that's carried on. It's not window dressing as such, or it's not tokenism. It's about how do we then make the most of that talent once it's in the organization.
I completely agree. And I think just on the point in terms of hiring, which is super important because that's where it all begins in terms of hiring diverse talent into the organizations. And right now, as I mentioned, with the net zero workforce, the new startups coming, the new technologies coming, we'll be creating so many more jobs. What I often hear is people saying that they've not been able to attract the right type of diverse pool. But at the same time, as you mentioned at Hyperion, 42% of the roles you place people in were basically female women in senior leadership. So if one organization can do it, there's no excuse. In my opinion, it's just about working a little harder.
Yeah.
And obviously there are other aspects to it as well. You will know more about this than I do, but in terms of the language, I've seen and I've heard from recruiters when the language around job description changes, or even apparently colors, that can help attract a more diverse pool of talent. Flexibility. So it really starts at that stage.
Yeah.
But then once we get them into the organization, then it's also about ensuring that we are cultivating that talent, nurturing it, and we don't lose it as well. Because then ultimately that talent helps create more representation, which is also super important, right? When you don't see people like yourselves in senior roles, then it in a way is a bit demotivating for people, especially early on their careers, to be motivated to work in those sectors and those companies too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think visuals and words are incredibly important, certainly in the hiring process, and I'm sure they are beyond that as well. And that's something we're happy to share with, and we'll post links on the podcast page to Powerful Women. So again, people might be able to connect with the organisation and see if there's any support or they can gain in taking this leap into creating more diverse environments. We've been talking a while. I want to jump back to Cleantech and get your crystal ball out for a moment, Rubina. We've been speaking for some years, and you've been in these roles that have brought you into some amazing places. Where do you see the big innovations happening in the next 3 to 5 years in terms of the addressing the climate challenges in particular?
So I think for me, the two key stand out. One, which you won't be surprised to hear, is batteries. I think there has so much innovation that has happened in batteries, but we're still scratching the surface in terms of the ability of the technology to have applications across so many different sectors in terms of enabling scaling up and deployment of current renewables technologies, addressing that intermittency, but also helping decentralization of energy security, electric vehicles. So battery technology is one area where I'm very excited about seeing innovation in terms of all the different aspects, from battery chemistry to business models. Another area where I think we maybe not seeing quite as much, but I think we'll be seeing one I'm quite excited about is the more hard to abate sectors.
Right.
So in energy and transport, these are some of the biggest sectors contributing towards carbon emissions. And we have solutions. We are looking at more solutions, but we have solutions which they need to be made more accessible, affordable, and scalable. But then when it comes to steel production, cement production, I think there is a huge opportunity in terms of coming up with new solutions there, in terms of decarbonizing those sectors. And in the meantime, until we can come up with a solution, I think carbon capture and sequestration can play a key role in terms of being that bridge to the future as well. So those are some of the areas I'm personally quite excited about.
Yeah, no, super excited. Seeing people like, I think, is it Eurosem and also Green Steel, obviously out of Sweden, where there's some great things happening in those sectors, which are, big polluters, but also, very important to society. And we need to address those. So that's great to see. Thanks for jumping into a little bit of the crystal ball. Batteries are a bit of my nerdiness as well. So material science, obviously, that supports that, and you've touched on that to start with, is an area that you're focused on. So there's lots going on. But it's been great to share those thoughts with you, Rubina. Thanks very much for joining us. What we'll do is we'll have on the episode pages links to, obviously, to yourself and to Octopus Ventures, and also to Powerful Women, and any other content we think is going to be useful for today's conversation. If you stay with us for a few moments, I'll just say to our guests, thanks very much, or to our audience, thanks very much for joining us again. I hope that's been an interesting conversation for you. Do engage with Rubina, with Octopus Ventures, and enjoy the episode. And if you do, please enjoy and share that within your community. It's great that we have a good audience here from our guests, and share just what really is happening within the clean tech sector, and of course what still needs to be done. Thanks for joining us.